My father smiled at me while preparing to take away the one thing I had built entirely on my own. And somehow that hurt more than if he had yelled. The ballroom smelled like white roses, expensive perfume, and the kind of money people in Connecticut like to quietly show off without ever admitting they care about status. Crystal chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors, while servers moved gracefully between tables carrying champagne that probably cost more than my first monthly rent payment back when I was 22, and sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment in Boston. My younger sister Chloe stood at the center of it all in a fitted ivory dress that shimmered every time she laughed, which was often. She had always known how to make a room orbit around her. Some people are born understanding attention the same way. Birds understand wind. Chloe never had to try. I did. I learned early that in our family, being loved and being useful were not the same thing. And if you've ever been the dependable child in a family that rewards the loudest one, you already know exactly where this story is headed. My name is Madison Hale. I'm 32 years old, and 3 hours before my sister's engagement party turned into the worst night of my life. I honestly believed I was finally done trying to earn my parents' approval. Looking back now, I think some part of me already knew something was wrong the moment I arrived at the hotel. My mother barely hugged me. My father kept disappearing into private conversations near the bar with men in tailored suits. And Chloe, strangely, wouldn't quite meet my eyes for more than a second at a time. The entire evening felt rehearsed somehow, like everyone had memorized lines except me. Still, I ignored the feeling because that's what I had done my whole life. Ignored things? Ignored the way my parents canceled my 16th birthday dinner because Chloe had a cheer competition. Ignored the way they emptied part of my college savings to help her find herself in Los Angeles after dropping out of school. Ignored how every success I achieved somehow became less impressive the moment Chloe walked into the room. By 32, I had built a real estate investment company from nothing, no family money, no connections, just exhaustion, discipline, and years of pretending rejection didn't hurt. 2 months earlier, I bought a lake house in Vermont with cash. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Private dock. The first thing in my life that truly felt peaceful. My mother called it a little excessive. Chloe called it cute. Neither of them understood what that house actually meant to me. But standing in that ballroom, watching my father glance toward the entrance for the third time in 10 minutes, I suddenly noticed a man walking in carrying a leather briefcase. A lawyer? And the moment I saw the thick stack of documents in his hands, my stomach dropped because, deep down, I already knew those papers had something to do with me. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I might be hallucinating. The applause sounded distant somehow, muffled beneath the rushing noise in my head, as every pair of eyes in that ballroom turned toward me with admiration I had not earned and promises I had never made. Chloe pressed both hands dramatically against her chest, like she was overwhelmed with emotion, and Ethan wrapped an arm around her waist while nodding toward me as if I had just handed them the keys already. I could barely feel my fingers anymore. My father raised his champagne glass higher, smiling proudly beneath the soft gold lighting. Madison has always believed family comes first, he continued smoothly. The guests responded with approving murmurs. The kind, wealthy people make when they witness generosity. They do not personally have to participate in. My mother leaned closer beside me and whispered, without moving her smile, "Do not ruin this night." The terrifying part was how calm she sounded. Not nervous, not apologetic, calm. Like this had been decided long before I walked into the ballroom. I stared at the stage while pieces of the past began sliding together inside my head with sickening clarity. The strange phone call from my father 2 weeks earlier asking detailed questions about the lake house taxes. Chloe suddenly wanting photos of the property for inspiration. My mother insisting I bring formal documents to dinner because successful women should always stay organized. None of it had been random. They had been planning this carefully, quietly, confidently, because in their minds, I always folded eventually. That was my role in the family. Chloe wanted, Madison provided. A server passed by carrying a tray of champagne flutes, and the sharp scent of citrus suddenly pulled me backward into a memory I had spent years trying not to revisit. I was 17. Standing in our kitchen after finding out my parents had emptied half my college savings account to pay for Chloe's failed acting program in California. I remember crying so hard I could barely breathe while my father stared at me over his newspaper and said, "You're the strong one. Madison, your sister needs more support." The strong one? It sounded complimentary until you realized it really meant disposable. Back in the ballroom, the lawyer finally stepped onto the stage holding the transfer papers, while guests continued smiling at me expectantly. Ethan's father stood near the front table with visible relief on his face. And that was when another awful realization hit me. This was bigger than Chloe. Much bigger. Ethan came from old Connecticut money, the kind tied to private investment groups and quiet political influence. This house was not just a wedding gift. It was part of some arrangement, some negotiation happening beneath the surface of this engagement party. My father extended his hand toward me from the stage. "Madison," he said warmly into the microphone, "why don't you come up here and make it official?" The ballroom erupted into applause again. Slowly, I started walking toward the stage, my heels clicking against the marble floor, while every instinct inside me screamed that the moment I touched those papers, something in my life would be impossible to get back. The words settled into my chest like a weight I could not immediately process. Dad could lose everything by Monday morning. Chloe's voice trembled when she said it. And for the first time all night, she did not sound spoiled or manipulative. She sounded terrified. I looked at her carefully, really looked at her, and suddenly noticed details I had missed before. The faint redness around her eyes beneath the makeup, the nervous way she kept twisting her engagement ring, the forced brightness in her smile every time guests glanced toward the stage. Whatever was happening here had started long before tonight. My father stepped closer beside the cocktail table, lowering his voice while the audience continued smiling up at us expectantly. "Madison," he said quietly, "this is not the time to make things difficult." Difficult. Another family word. In our house, difficult meant asking questions nobody wanted to answer. It meant refusing to quietly absorb damage so everyone else could stay comfortable. I looked back down at the documents. The legal language was dense, but years in business had trained me to spot panic hidden inside polished paperwork. Emergency collateral requirements, accelerated lender protections, immediate asset seizure clauses. This was not a temporary cash flow problem. This was collapse. My father's company was bleeding out, and they had run out of places to hide it. A strange memory surfaced then, one I had not thought about in years. I was 11, standing outside my parents' bedroom late at night while they argued in whispers they thought I could not hear. My mother crying softly, my father insisting everything would be fine once the next deal closed. I remember realizing, even as a child, that our family operated on appearances the same way casinos operate on flashing lights. If things looked stable enough from the outside, maybe nobody would notice the foundation cracking underneath. Suddenly, Ethan's father approached the stage with a polite smile that never quite reached his eyes. Charles Whitmore was the kind of man who made silence feel intentional. Expensive watch. Tailored suit. Calm posture. The entire room subtly shifted around him. "Victor," he said smoothly to my father, "perhaps we should finalize things before the press photographer arrives." Press photographer. Of course, there was one. My father was not just trying to save his business. He was trying to publicly secure confidence. If I signed those papers tonight in front of investors and cameras, it would signal stability, family unity, financial trust. My lake house was not collateral anymore. It was bait. I slowly lifted my eyes toward my father. "How bad is it?" I asked quietly. His jaw tightened for the first time all evening. My mother immediately stepped in. "Do not do this here," she whispered sharply. But Chloe suddenly grabbed my wrist hard enough to stop me from stepping back. Her face had gone pale. "Madison," she said, her voice barely audible now, "there is something else you do not know." Then she looked directly toward Ethan's father, and the fear in her expression made my entire body go cold. The silence between us stretched so tightly I thought it might finally snap the polished illusion my family had spent decades building. Around the ballroom, guests still smiled politely, unaware that the celebration beneath the chandeliers had quietly transformed into something desperate and ugly. A violinist near the corner continued playing soft jazz standards, while investors sipped champagne only a few feet away from the slow collapse of my father's entire life. The contrast made me feel dizzy. My father recovered first. He always did. I watched him straighten his tuxedo jacket and force another controlled smile onto his face, like a man trying to patch cracks in a dam with his bare hands. "Federal investigations do not mean guilt," he said calmly. Though a pulse had started jumping visibly in his neck, Ethan's father said nothing. That silence alone told me more than words could have. My mother stepped toward me again, her voice trembling. "Now, Madison, please. We can fix this if we stay united." United. Another beautiful family word that somehow always translated into me carrying consequences nobody else wanted. Chloe wiped tears carefully beneath her eyes, trying not to ruin her makeup. "I did not know it was this bad at first," she whispered. "Dad kept saying the merger would solve everything." I looked at her sharply. At first, Chloe hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than any answer, because suddenly I understood she had known for longer than she admitted. Maybe all of them had. I thought about the expensive engagement party surrounding us, the floral installations flown in from New York, the custom champagne wall, the 5-piece band, all of it paid for while the company quietly drowned beneath the surface. It was like watching people decorate a sinking ship. My father lowered his voice. "If this merger collapses, hundreds of employees could lose their jobs." There it was. The shift. Not guilt. Strategy. He was no longer speaking to me as a daughter. He was speaking to me as leverage. My chest tightened with something dangerously close to anger now, because even standing on the edge of disaster, my father still knew exactly how to weaponize responsibility against me. "So, this is my fault if I refuse." I asked quietly. No. My mother answered too quickly. Of course not. But nobody actually denied it. Ethan suddenly exhaled sharply beside Chloe and rubbed a hand across his face. Victor, Himura, this is exactly why my father warned me not to mix business with family. My father turned toward him immediately. Your father is still committed to this deal? Ethan did not answer right away. Instead, he glanced toward Charles Whitmore across the ballroom. The older man was already checking his watch while quietly speaking to two men in dark suits near the entrance. Something about the way they carried themselves made my stomach twist harder. Not investors, lawyers, or worse. Chloe noticed them too, because she suddenly grabbed my arm again, panic breaking fully through her composure. Now, Madison, she whispered desperately, if the merger fails tonight, they are going to audit everything. I stared at her. Everything. Chloe's lips parted slightly, like she instantly regretted saying too much. Then my father's expression changed completely as he followed my line of sight toward the ballroom entrance. Two unfamiliar men had just walked inside holding federal identification badges. For a moment, I genuinely could not speak. The agent's question echoed through my head while the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath around me. Did you know your property was listed under Hale Development Group's emergency asset disclosures? My first instinct was denial. There had to be some mistake. I bought that house through my own holding company. Every payment, every document, every inspection had gone through my private legal team in Boston. My father should not have been able to touch it. But deep down, beneath the panic rising in my chest, another feeling started forming. Recognition. Small details I ignored suddenly resurfaced with terrifying clarity. 6 months earlier, my father had insisted on introducing me to a trusted corporate attorney after I closed a major acquisition deal. 2 months ago, he asked strange questions about my asset structures over dinner, pretending he was just impressed by my success. 3 weeks ago, my accountant mentioned unusual access requests tied to my real estate filings, but I brushed it off because the requests came through Hale Development Group's internal authorization channels. My father had not been trying to convince me tonight. He had already moved pieces into place long before this ballroom ever filled with music and champagne. I slowly turned toward him. What did you do? My voice barely sounded like my own anymore. My father's face hardened instantly. Not guilt. Survival. Madison, lower your voice. That answer told me everything. My mother looked completely lost, now eyes darting between us like she was realizing for the first time how much had been hidden from her too. Chloe stepped backward beside Ethan, visibly shaking. Dad, she whispered, you told me it was temporary. You said the paperwork was legal. My father snapped toward her so sharply she flinched. It is legal. But nobody believed him anymore. Not even himself. Around the ballroom, whispers had started spreading quietly from table to table as guests noticed the agent speaking with Charles Whitmore and the visible tension gathering near the stage. The music stopped entirely now. Glasses lowered. Smiles faded. The beautiful engagement party atmosphere evaporated so quickly it felt unreal. Ethan finally looked directly at me, and for the first time all night, there was no politeness left in his expression. Only anger. My father never agreed to this. He said coldly, Victor told us your property had already been committed voluntarily. My stomach dropped. My father had used my name without permission to secure the merger. Worse, he had convinced everyone involved that I already agreed to it. Suddenly, I understood why tonight had been staged so publicly. If I signed willingly in front of investors and witnesses, it would erase every questionable step leading up to this moment. My father was not trying to save the company anymore. He was trying to cover evidence before the investigation reached it. The realization hit me so hard I actually felt dizzy. The man who taught me to double-check contracts, protect my reputation, and never trust emotional decisions had quietly built a financial trap around his own daughter. Then, one of the agents stepped closer, holding a thin black folder in his hands. "Ems. Hale," he said carefully. "There is one more issue you need to be aware of." He opened the folder slowly and slid a document toward me. At the bottom of the page, beside forged authorization signatures tied to my property transfers, was my own name. My entire body went numb. Temporary review status. The phrase sounded sterile and harmless on the surface, but anyone who worked in finance knew exactly what it meant. Frozen access. Internal flags. Quiet containment before something exploded publicly. I stared at the agent, barely able to process his words over the roaring in my ears. "What are you talking about?" I asked slowly. The agent exchanged a glance with his partner before answering. "Several accounts connected to your business entities were flagged during the investigation into Hale Development Group." My mother looked horrified. "No," she whispered immediately, shaking her head toward my father. "Victor, tell me you did not involve her accounts." But my father still said nothing. That silence finally shattered something inside me. For years, I defended him in ways he never deserved. Even when he disappointed me, manipulated me, overlooked me, some part of me still believed there was a line he would never cross. Fathers were supposed to protect their daughters. Mine had quietly tied a financial anchor around my neck and waited for me to drown beside him. I stepped back from the cocktail table, suddenly needing distance from all of them. The ballroom lights felt too bright against my eyes now. Somewhere near the bar, a wine glass shattered against the floor, making several guests jump as whispers spread faster through the room. People were leaving openly now, gathering coats and purses while pretending not to stare. Fairfield County thrived on polished appearances, but scandal traveled through wealthy communities like fire through dry grass. By morning, everyone here would know. Ethan moved protectively closer to Chloe, while Charles Whitmore spoke in hushed, furious tones to the federal agents near the stage. "You said this would stay contained." Charles snapped quietly toward my father. "You assured me your daughter was cooperating voluntarily." My father finally exploded. "Because she was supposed to cooperate." The words echoed louder than he intended. Several heads turned immediately toward us. My chest tightened painfully. There it was. The truth stripped bare in one sentence. He never saw me as a person standing in front of him with a life of my own. I was an asset, a solution, a financial extension of himself. Chloe started crying harder beside Ethan. Now, "Dad, stop," she pleaded softly. "You are making this worse." Worse. My father barked bitterly. "Do you think any of you survive this, if that merger collapses?" My mother looked at him like she no longer recognized the man she married. "Survive," she whispered. "Victor, what have you done?" He looked at her then, and for the first time all night, I saw genuine exhaustion break through his anger. He suddenly looked older, smaller somehow, like a man who had spent years sprinting from consequences that finally caught him. I ran out of options, he admitted quietly. The ballroom fell eerily silent around us. Even the staff had stopped moving. Then, one of the agents opened another file folder and said something that made every drop of blood leave my body. IMS, Hale. There is evidence suggesting someone attempted to move funds through your accounts 3 nights ago. My mind immediately flashed to the notification I ignored while packing for this trip. Unusual login attempt detected. I had dismissed it as a security glitch. The agent slid a printed transfer record toward me slowly. At the bottom of the page, attached to a pending offshore transaction worth millions of dollars, was the login authorization tied directly to my personal credentials. His words hit me harder than every lie that came before them. Strong enough to survive this. My father said it like it was love. Like destroying me was somehow proof that he believed in me more than anyone else ever could. And that was the moment I finally understood the real tragedy of my family. We had spent so many years confusing survival with love that none of us knew the difference anymore. My mother broke first. "Stop talking," she whispered sharply through tears. "Please. Victor, just stop." But he could not. The pressure inside him had finally ruptured. Years of pretending, manipulating, controlling every outcome had collapsed into one desperate confession standing beneath crystal chandeliers while half the ballroom watched in stunned silence. "You think I wanted this?" He snapped toward all of us. "You think I enjoyed begging banks to delay foreclosure notices, hiding payroll shortages, watching everything I built get picked apart by people waiting for me to fail?" His voice cracked on the last sentence. I had never heard that sound from him before. My father did not crack. He did not unravel. But now he looked less like a powerful businessman and more like a man stranded in the wreckage of his own ego. Chloe stepped back slowly, shaking her head through tears. "You said we were protecting the family." "I was protecting the family." He fired back instantly. "Everything I did was for this family." "No?" I said quietly. The single word cut through the ballroom harder than shouting ever could. Everyone looked at me. My father froze. Even the agents stopped speaking. I felt strangely calm now, like something inside me had burned itself empty. "You were protecting yourself," I said. "You just used us to do it." My father stared at me as though I had physically struck him. For a second, I almost hated myself for seeing the hurt in his eyes. Because despite everything, part of me still remembered being 6 years old and falling asleep on his chest while he explained constellations through our backyard telescope. Trauma does not erase love cleanly. That is what makes betrayal so unbearable. Ethan suddenly removed his engagement ring from his finger and placed it quietly on the cocktail table beside the contracts. Chloe gasped softly. "Ethan," he looked devastated. "I cannot marry into this," he said hoarsely. Chloe started crying openly now, reaching for him, but he stepped back. Charles Whitmore immediately motioned for his legal team near the entrance. "The merger is terminated effective immediately," he announced coldly. The words landed like an execution sentence. My father physically staggered backward. My mother covered her face with both hands. Somewhere across the ballroom, I heard guests hurriedly gathering belongings as panic spread completely through the room now. Then one of the federal agents stepped closer to my father with quiet professionalism. "Mr. Hale, we are going to need you to come with us tonight for further questioning." The entire ballroom went dead silent. My father looked at me one last time then, and I will never forget the expression on his face. Not anger, not pride, just exhaustion. The kind that comes from spending years outrunning consequences before realizing there is nowhere left to run. Chloe collapsed into a chair, sobbing quietly, while my mother stood frozen beside her like someone watching her entire life disappear in real time. And somehow, in the middle of all that destruction, I realized the most painful part was not losing my house, or my accounts, or even my reputation. It was realizing that my family had only truly needed me when they were drowning. By midnight, the ballroom barely resembled the place where 200 people had laughed beneath chandeliers only hours earlier. Half-melted candles leaned sideways across abandoned tables. Wilted white roses covered the marble floor near the stage, where guests had rushed out carrying coats and whispered rumors. The string quartet had packed up quietly sometime during the chaos, leaving behind a silence that felt strangely intimate after so much tension. I stood alone near the tall windows overlooking downtown Hartford, watching rain slide slowly down the glass while flashing red and blue lights from federal vehicles reflected across the wet streets below. Somewhere behind me, hotel staff folded linens and cleared empty champagne flutes with the careful politeness people use around grief. My entire body felt exhausted, but not in the normal way exhaustion feels after a long day. This felt heavier, like mourning something I could not fully name yet. Not just my father's company, not just the engagement party. I was mourning the version of my family I spent my whole life trying to protect. My mother approached quietly, holding my coat in both hands like she did when I was little and used to fall asleep in the back seat after family dinners. "You should not drive tonight," she said softly. Her voice sounded smaller now, stripped of the sharp perfection she always carried around other people. I took the coat from her slowly. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she looked out toward the rain-covered city and whispered, "I used to think keeping peace in a family was the same thing as love." The honesty in her voice hurt more than excuses would have. "Mom," she shook her head before I could continue. "No. Let me say this while I still can." Tears gathered quietly in her eyes again. "I saw things for years that I should have stopped. Your father borrowing from you, Chloe depending on you, the pressure we put on you every time something went wrong." She swallowed hard. "And every time, I told myself you could handle it because you always did." I stared at the rain sliding down the windows while her words settled somewhere deep inside me. That had always been the tragedy of being the strong one. People stop asking whether you are hurting because they become too comfortable watching you survive. Across the ballroom, Chloe sat alone near the empty dance floor, still wearing her pale ivory dress with mascara stains beneath her eyes. Ethan was gone. Most of the guests were gone. The photographers were gone. All the beautiful performance pieces had disappeared, leaving only real people behind. Chloe looked up at me carefully as I approached. I kept thinking if Dad fixed the company, everything would go back to normal, she admitted quietly. But I do not even know what normal was anymore. I sat beside her without answering immediately, because the truth was, I did not know either. For most of my life, normal, meant sacrificing pieces of myself to keep everyone else emotionally afloat. And now that structure had finally collapsed, Chloe stared down at the engagement ring, still sitting on her finger. Then, after a long silence, she slowly removed it and placed it gently on the table beside her. No drama. No tears. Just quiet acceptance. And somehow, watching her do that felt like the first honest thing either of us had seen all night. 3 months later, I stood barefoot on the dock of my lake house, watching the first snow of December drift quietly across the water. The world looked completely different in winter. The trees surrounding the lake had gone bare, and the surface of the water reflected the pale gray sky like glass. Everything felt still in a way my life never had before. I wrapped both hands around a mug of coffee and listened to the silence settle around me. No ringing phones. No emergency meetings. No family crises waiting for me to fix them. Just cold air, distant wind through the trees, and the soft creaking of the dock beneath my feet. After the investigation became public, Hale Development Group collapsed faster than anyone expected. News stations picked up the story for a few weeks. Investors disappeared overnight, and people who used to crowd around my father at charity galas suddenly acted like they had never known him at all. Funny how quickly admiration changes when power disappears. My father eventually accepted a plea agreement. I saw him only once after that night at the hotel. We sat across from each other in a quiet attorney conference room with fluorescent lights humming overhead while untouched coffee went cold between us. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller, too. Like life had finally stripped away every performance he spent years hiding behind. At one point, he looked at me and said softly, "I spent so much time trying to protect what I built that I forgot I was destroying the people I built it for." I never knew how to answer that, because part of healing is realizing some apologies arrived too late to repair what they broke. But accepting them anyway can still set you free. Chloe moved into a small apartment in Boston and started working for a nonprofit legal aid office. We talk now. Not every day. Not like best friends in movies. But honestly, for the first time in our lives, we speak to each other without pretending. Sometimes that matters more than closeness. My mother started therapy shortly after everything happened. A few weeks ago, she mailed me a photo she found while cleaning out old boxes from our childhood home. I was maybe 7 years old in the picture, sitting on my father's shoulders at the county fair while Chloe held cotton candy beside us. We all looked genuinely happy. I stared at that picture for a long time because it reminded me that families rarely fall apart all at once. Usually they erode slowly, through silence, pressure, expectations, and the quiet belief that love must always cost someone something. The snow continued falling softly over the lake as I stood there watching the water disappear beneath white frost. For years, I thought being strong meant enduring whatever people demanded from me without breaking. But now I think real strength might be quieter than that. Maybe it is learning where your responsibility ends. Maybe it is understanding that saving people should never require losing yourself. And sometimes I still catch myself wondering how many people carry that same invisible weight inside their families without ever speaking about it out loud. How many people were taught that love and sacrifice are the same thing? Maybe someone listening to this knows exactly what that feels like.